What's up guys, Tommy Bowyer here from Movie Rewind, and today we will be ranking Spider-Man film villain adaptations. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Spider-Man probably has one of the biggest and most memorable rogues galleries out there. The only superhero who can probably compete with Spider-Man is Batman. And since the very first Spider-Man film was released in the year 2002, a lot of Spider-Man villains have got the big screen treatment. And because I always enjoy doing Spider-Man themed videos, I thought I would rank Spider-Man villains who have been adapted for film from worst to best. Now there are three things in particular I will be looking at while ranking these adaptations. The first is how much they are faithful to the comics and TV shows which these villains appear in. The second thing I'll be looking at is how much of a threat they pose to Spider-Man in these films and how much challenges he has to overcome in order to defeat them. And the third thing I will be looking at is how well the actors and actresses who portray these villains give to their performance and how well they stand out in your mind and leave an impression on the viewer. And of course, as I will be ranking villains who have appeared in Spider-Man films, that does mean that there will be spoilers for the majority of Spider-Man films that have been released in recent years. So now that that is all sorted, let's go ahead and start ranking these villains. So in last place is Rhino, portrayed by Paul Giamatti in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for about 10 minutes. And that is one of the main problems with what this film does with the character of Rhino, because he doesn't actually appear very long. He gets two scenes in this film. One scene at the beginning of the film when Spider-Man defeats him, however, he's not actually the Rhino in that scene, and probably one 5-minute scene at the end when he's actually the Rhino, and you don't even see Spider-Man fight the Rhino. The main problem I have with the Rhino in this film is Paul Giamatti's performance is way over the top. It just does not work. It feels like a cartoon, and he just doesn't have enough screen time to leave an impression on the viewer. I really feel Paul Giamatti was miscast for this role, and the film really doesn't understand how to do the Rhino appropriately, especially if you watch trailers and see posters for this film. It looks like the Rhino's going to have a crucial role in this film when he doesn't. He is just the end of the film, so that really is a letdown. So that is why Rhino is at last place on this list. At number 12 is the Green Goblin, portrayed by Dan DeHaan in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, the Green Goblin is a character who has had two film adaptations, and Dan DeHaan's performance in this film is a massive letdown. For one, Harry Osborn's motives stink in this film. He's trying to find a cure for this incurable disease which his father lived with for 40 years. However, he is dying right now, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And when Harry Osborn does become the Green Goblin, it just feels very forced. You don't feel like there's any tension between the Green Goblin and Spider-Man there. And of course, this is a massive letdown because, of course, in this film, they do the death of Gwen Stacy, which is emotional, don't get me wrong, although I feel it would have had more of an impact if the Green Goblin was actually a memorable villain in this film. And plus, the design for this character is horrible. It looks like he has measles. It doesn't look like the Green Goblin. I wouldn't recognise him as the Green Goblin. He's just a massive letdown. His motives don't make sense, and much like the Rhino, he doesn't get a lot of screen time as the Green Goblin. He probably gets about 10 to 15 minutes in this film. So once again, he's not in the film enough to really leave an impression on the viewer. At number 11, I have put Electro, portrayed by Jamie Foxx in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And if you've noticed, all the villains from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 have ranked very lowly on my list because it is a terrible film. Now, when this film started and you see Max Dillon, portrayed by Jamie Foxx, I just don't like his character. I don't really feel any sympathy for him because he comes across as some weird stalker who's obsessed with Spider-Man. So I don't really understand how you're supposed to relate to him and feel sympathy for him because it just doesn't work. Although the first scene with Electro in Times Square when he's dressed in all the rags and he's fighting Spider-Man, I actually really enjoy. It was like, yes, they've got Electro there, because Electro is actually a very tragic Spider-Man villain. I mean, just watch some of the animated shows and you'll see how tragic a character Electro is, and they got that spot on there. Although once he's in the hospital and then he teams up with the Green Goblin to take down Spider-Man, it just didn't work. He's dressed in this very latex type suit, which really doesn't make any sense, because how the hell did he manufacture that? Last time we saw him, he was in rags, and now he's in this suit, which makes no sense. And the final action scene between him and Spider-Man, I don't really enjoy. The CGI is nothing impressive, and he doesn't seem to pose a lot of a threat, really. He's defeated quite easily, and I don't understand his motives. He just seems to be some obsessed fan who's upset because Spider-Man doesn't really care about him. So Electro is very disappointing. He started off good, however, as the film went on, he just became a very poor character with no real development. So that's why I've ranked him so low on the list. At number 10 is Shocker, portrayed by Bokeem Woodbine in Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, Shocker in this film is a secondary antagonist. He's basically a henchman to the primary antagonist, Vulture. So don't expect too much from Shocker in this film. Although, I do actually think he's portrayed pretty well in this film, especially when you think he's only really a henchman. So I think Bokeem Woodbine does good with what he is given here. He has some good fight scenes with Spider-Man, which I think is really good. The main problem I have with Shocker is I feel like he's defeated too easily, because of course he's defeated by Ned, which I think is a bit of a letdown, because that kind of undermines the power of Shocker, because he's just defeated by a high school kid with no real powers. Although I think he does have some good fight scenes with Spider-Man. He does have a presence on screen, and I think the style that they went with this character is really good. The main problem is, because he's a henchman, he doesn't get an awfully lot of screen time. However, he does good with the screen time that he is given. At number 9, I have put Venom, portrayed by Topher Grace in Spider-Man 3. Now, before you ask, I haven't ranked Tom Hardy on this list because he hasn't actually fought Spider-Man yet, so I wouldn't say he's a Spider-Man villain adaptation, because he hasn't gone up against Spider-Man yet. However, Topher Grace is pretty weak as Venom, don't get me wrong. He's not really he's okay as Eddie Brock. You kind of get that kind of seedy, deceitful liar, so he kind of comes across okay as Eddie Brock, although you just can't see this actor as Venom. He was very miscast in this film. Although the actual style they go with on Venom here is actually pretty good. The CGI works really well. If he was a bit more bulky and bigger like he is in the comics and the TV shows, I'd probably prefer him. Although I do think Venom does pose a threat to Spider-Man in this film, and it's a good action scene at the end of the film. I think the main problem is, not only was Topher Grace miscast, although you don't see a lot of Venom in this film, he's kind of relegated to the final action scene, so that is a problem. He doesn't get a lot of screen time in this film. I think he is better than some of the others I've put lower on the list, because I think the CGI works very well and he's quite faithful to the comic books. He does look like Venom. The main problem is Topher Grace was just not right for the role, and he doesn't get a lot of screen time. At number 8 is the new Goblin, portrayed by James Franco in Spider-Man 3. Now, this is a Spider-Man villain which was set up throughout Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, because, of course, Harry Osborn has always had some friction with Peter Parker, especially after his father, Norman Osborn, dies, and Harry Osborn kind of blames Spider-Man for the death of his father. So once he finds out that Spider-Man is Peter Parker and that his father was the Green Goblin, he starts taking the Green Goblin gas and becomes the new Goblin. Now, in terms of this character, he was built up throughout the film, so the development for the new Goblin is pretty strong, because you've had 3 films to build up this character. However, I feel the execution in Spider-Man 3 was not done very well. At first, I really enjoyed him, especially the first action scene between the new Goblin and Spider-Man, because there's a lot of friction there, there's anger, you know he's doing this to get revenge on his father's death, and it felt real. However, after the new Goblin loses his memory, he becomes a less compelling character, because of course all that development and and tension that you have built up throughout the course of the Spider-Man trilogy is lost because he's lost his memory. So he's no longer a very compelling character. When he gets his memory back, you start seeing that he becomes a compelling character. Again, there's a great action scene between New Goblin and Spider-Man halfway through the film, which is really strong. And I do like the fact that unlike a lot of Spider-Man villains, New Goblin realizes the error of his ways and actually teams up to help Spider-Man rescue Mary Jane and defeat Sandman and Venom. So I like New Goblin. I think he's got a lot of development. I just think that the execution in Spider-Man 3 was not done very well, especially making him lose his memory made him such a less compelling character. So I think that's the main problem. I like New Goblin. I just think that the execution could have been done a bit better. At number 7 is Mysterio, portrayed by Jake Gyllenhaal in Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, this guy had to portray two very different characters in this film, because at first he's portraying this kind of heroic Mysterio who's from another dimension and who's come here to fight off this threat and protect the Earth. And then halfway through the film, he becomes this insane scientist who's obsessed with ruining Tony Stark and becoming famous without really doing anything. Now, the main thing I can say about Mysterio in this film is he is portrayed really well. I like Jake Gyllenhaal's performance. I think he gets Mysterio on point there, and especially as the plot twist that Mysterio is it's all effects, which I should have seen coming because I'm a Spider-Man fan, so I should have seen that coming. However, it still took me by surprise because Jake Gyllenhaal, the way he portrays Mysterio, you kind of invested in him. You're like, wow, this guy is a good guy. Mysterio is doing the right thing. He's a good guy. And then when you find out it's not, it's like, oh, I didn't see that coming. I had no idea. And of course, there's a great action scene in this film between Mysterio and Spider-Man, which is done straight out from the comics when Mysterio is using all his illusions against Spider-Man. I thought that was fantastic. That's bang on. They got that straight from the comics and it's done really well here. I like Mysterio in this film because he's a very layered character, and the fact that I honestly didn't see it coming because because they make you think that he is a good guy when he's not. He's actually a villain, which I should have seen coming, but I just didn't. So I think Mysterio is portrayed really well in this film, and Jake Gyllenhaal does a great performance in the role. So thanks for watching, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed part 1 of this video, because there were so many Spider-Man villains that have been adapted for film that I felt that I should split this video into 2 just so you guys enjoy it a bit more. So please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. I intend to get the second part of this video out on Friday, so I hope you guys look forward to that, and I will see you then. See ya!